Welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting of the Cape Coral City Council. Today is February 8th, 2023. This meeting now comes to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Gunter,
Here.
Council members Cosden,
Here.
Cummings,
Here.
Hayden,
Here.
Long,
Here.
Shepherd, Steinke,
Here.
Welsh, all present.
Thank you. Item 4 is business. 4A is citizens' input time. Citizens' input is a maximum of 60 minutes is set for the input of citizens on matters concerning city government, 3 minutes per individual. Please remember to state your name for the record. We'll use the podium to my left, and the 3-minute clock is in front of me. So you, during your presentation, you can keep an eye on your time. Anyone wishing to speak, please come forward.
Good morning, Mayor Gunter, council members. My name is Lori House-Bulcock, 2723 Archer Parkway, East Cape Coral. I'm here representing the 500 members of Cape Coral Friends of Wildlife and Cape Coral Wildlife Trust. The mission of Cape Coral Friends of Wildlife is to preserve and enhance the habitats of protected wildlife species. 2 weeks ago, it came to our attention that canals in the Cedars and Embers Parkway neighborhoods were being scraped of weeds, grass, brush, vines, and trees in the guise of Hurricane Ian debris removal. I will begin sharing photos of the destruction imposed by overzealous contractors wielding excavators and driving tandem debris trucks. First one, did you put the first one up already? Oh, so the first picture was one of what they're used to looking at up there when they look out there at their lanais, at the canals. Okay, and let's just progress through it. You get the idea of what's going on here. Moonscape. Okay, I'm just going to stop for a second. So there are many issues involved with this. Burrowing owls and gopher tortoises are certainly one of them. And this is part of what I'll mention is this is a situation where there were multiple burrows right in the middle of a property and, of course, vegetation behind on the canal that needed to be cleaned. And so even though there were the PVC pipes around it, it was very difficult, but they still had to get to the vegetation. So the machines were kind of like teetering on, being too close. So next week starts the burrowing owl nesting season. Some start nesting in December. So that could have been potentially dangerous. Okay, so I give you the limpkin, protected by the U.S. Migratory Bird Act and Florida's Threatened Species Rule. Dozens of limpkins make their homes in the areas I have identified. One resident was alerted to the horrible denuding of the canal banks next door by the piercing scream of limpkins. Many wildlife species survived the wrath of Hurricane Ian, including the limpkin. Is that it already? Mm-hmm. Okay, only to surrender its home and perhaps its life just weeks later to the claws of an excavator. Thank you for your attention and consideration.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Hi,
My name is Michelle Mold. I live at 822 El Dorado Parkway East, down by the Yacht Club. Good morning, Mayor and council members. It is an honor to be here. What I'd like to read is emails that we have received from members, non-members, through our phone contacts, through everything. And Bernadette, who handles our phones, is getting hundreds of calls. I have to wear my sunglasses because they're prescription. Anyway, I am so angry it literally has made me sick. It feels like a ball of anger wants to burst from my stomach. Thank you for writing back to me. I'm happy to have provided those photos. If for any reason the meeting is postponed or the issue extended, we'd be happy to go out and take more photos. I just got done writing a seething letter to the mayor and every council member. I sent them the photos as well. Everything that was beautiful about the canals has been destroyed for nothing. The people that destroyed some of the very essence that makes our area what it is got a truckload of money, and we got destruction and still have trash. This was one sent to Pasha. I'm sending 3 sets of photos. You will note that perfectly good trees were cut down, banks exposed, silt in the water, etc. Please ask this one question to the city officials. And this is not a negative, but it's just a question. Wouldn't taxpayer dollars have been better spent picking up the trash that litters the entire city? And why not focus on the piles of brush that still sits on Veterans Boulevard? Instead, we are ripping up perfectly good trees, infrastructure, etc. The photos speak for themselves. These trees were cut at the base. I will tell you that all about the money. I want to scream that they disturbed all the wildlife near my home on Tropicana. There were turtle habitats, gopher tortoise, but she writes turtles, and wild bird nests that were destroyed. I saw birds flying out of the trees to save their lives. While I was trying to get my home built nearly 19 months ago, the city made us take permits to relocate the turtles at a huge expense. I wanted to keep them on the lot next to me while this was happening and return them to my yard after the construction. And they claimed it would be harmful for the turtles doing that. They're liars. They just destroyed turtle habitats, and someone has to be held responsible. I can't stand by and watch, so my husband and I pointed out the habitats within the tree-lined area along the water on the north side of my home to make them stop. For now, we were successful in not letting them do the lot on the north side of my house. However, the south side of my house lot is wiped clean. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
My name is Cheryl Anderson, Cheryl Anderson. I live at 606 Southwest 49th Lane in the Cape. I'm president of the Cape Coral Wildlife Trust and a member of the board of directors of the Cape Coral Friends of Wildlife. Notice it's Friends of Wildlife, not just friends of burrowing owls or gopher tortoises, but all of our wildlife. And our mission is to preserve and protect the wildlife in Cape Coral. You know what they say about people on a mission, right? They're tough to deal with. This is our mission. So we're here to talk about what's happened in the canals in the Cape under the guise of clearing Hurricane Ian debris. And the city has sent us the permits that they received from the Army Corps and from the DEP, and they all specify clearly it's for removing hurricane debris, okay? It says nothing about live vegetation. It says nothing about stripping the banks. It says hurricane debris, which we all know what that is. We picked up lots of hurricane debris after the storm. I did, you did. It's dead branches and leaves. That's not what we're seeing being picked up. Let me go to one particular issue, and that's that all of the gopher tortoise and burrowing owl burrows in this city are marked. That's ridiculous. There's hundreds of gopher tortoise and burrowing owl burrows in the city that are not marked. These are wild animals. They're constantly on the move, looking for food and now looking for shelter and nesting space, which has been destroyed. So they're not on all the maps. They're not all GPSed. There's no way for anybody to identify them unless an ecologist walks the property and lists and tags every single every single burrow that may be occupied by these protected species. Tough job, right? It should be a tough job because citizens have to pay to do this, have to pay ecologists to do this in the city without a permit to do this. Only permits to clear hurricane debris is going out and doing this. One other issue would be the issue of erosion. You saw the pictures she put. A lot of the homes were saved from flooding by the plants and the roots and the vegetation that was on the sides of these canals. Now that's been eliminated. The first big rain we have, I don't know if you remember 2018, we had 14 inches of rain in May. That dirt goes right into the canal. Then what happens? We got to get a dredge, which is what you should be using in the first place. You should have a barge to remove this debris. And now you're going to have to dredge the canals because all that soil is going to go back into the water. So I'm going to finish by saying what I said while I sat in a Cat 4 hurricane at my friend's house. I said, make this stop. Please, make this stop. Thank you.
Good morning, council people. My name is Carl Vogt. For the record, I live at 3705 Southeast 3rd Place from 1980. I am president of Cape Coral Friends of Wildlife and vice president of Cape Coral Wildlife Trust. I come to you today to plead with you to make a plan to save the wildlife. I don't think that was made. You can work with the Fish and Game, but it needs to be done before any lot is mowed over. I believe that there should be mitigation money paid, and I don't know if they paid money, but they, from what the residents tell me, they ran over burrowing owl nest and gopher tortoise holes. And this is wrong. We should save our wildlife in Cape Coral, and I'm surprised that you guys didn't speak up and say that. I don't see one of you really advocating for the wildlife in Cape Coral except Jessica, and I think this is wrong. We need your support to help stop this carnage. You know, they destroy the root systems, and some of those lots, when there's a good rain, all that dirt that they left there just openly will just drain right back into the canals, and you'll have a worse situation. You'll have mud holes. And this is, as I say, terrible. The wildlife needs your trust. They need your support. The mayor thinks of balance. Well, there's no balance in Cape Coral for wildlife. I haven't seen it from you people. You need to do something for the wildlife or we won't have any. And why is this important? Because thousands of people come here over the years to see our burrowing owls. They go in the Chamber of Commerce, and what do they say to them? Where are the burrowing owls? We won't have any if this keeps up. I ask you to stop this. And then the last thing I'm going to say, one of your employees should go out and check those lots for burrowing owl nest and gopher tortoise, and even in the trees. They've cut down trees with bird nest in it. And the last thing I'm going to say, use your code enforcement, your rangers, and the environmental people. Thank you for your time. I speak for all the wildlife. Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor, Council members. My name is Alessia Leders. I live on 1107 Southwest 8th Court. I'm going to celebrate 20 years living in this beautiful city of Cape Coral. I am a board member, and I am here to talk not only about wildlife, but as humans and the need we have for green spaces. According to the study paid by the city in 2016, made by Bard and Associates, we are in a deficit of green areas. So they estimate that we have only 4.7 acres of parkland per 1,000 people, when the benchmark should be 12 acres, according to the National Recreation and Park Association. This is nationwide. So we are in a park desert, if you might say so. So we are here in defense of wildlife, but also we are here in defense of another species, us, nosotros. We are in desperate need of more green areas. And believe it or not, those canals and those adjacent banks replace what we are lacking of in terms of green areas. So there are many studies done in Europe and United States, cited by Yale University, that accounts over and over again the need, what we have in terms of the human need in terms of physical benefits, emotional benefits, and social benefits. So there was a study in 2015 made, published by Bioscience, and the study found that more exposure to nature translated into more community cohesion and lower crime rates. So we are talking about a social problem as well. So yes, there are not many parks and green areas around now that the city is one of the most, presents the fastest growing rates in the nation. That's why the canals and the banks serve that purpose. So they are vital for our wildlife, but also for us. I'm sure some of you live in front of a canal, so you know what I'm talking about, how relaxing it is come after work and see what you have in Cape Coral. Our canals, 400 miles of canal, are the heart of Cape Coral. Is what makes Cape Coral this city, Cape Coral. So please, I urge you to please instruct Public Works to respect state and federal laws and act according to the protocols established by the National Environmental Policy Act, known as NEPA, and established in 1969, which represents the Magna Carta in terms of conservation in our country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, folks. I'd like to look at this from the 30,000-foot view. I'm Jim Collier. I've lived in the Cape with my wife for about 20 years. We live in the Southwest Cape. This effort appears to me to be partial lot clearing, essentially for the benefit of builders and developers without the necessary permits to displace that wildlife or take that wildlife, thus saving developers and builders lots of money on these particular lots, both private and occupied by, let's say, non-governmental entities such as the Wildlife Trust. The added benefit is that nobody's asking for a take permit to displace these animals, this wildlife. Cape Coral makes a lot of money from the city of Cape, the economics of the various businesses in the Cape and related to the Cape makes a lot of money from wildlife of all kinds, birds, tortoises, etc. We might be wasting some of that. We are paying this contractor or the series of contractors and subcontractors by the pound. That would appear to incentivize them to if you want to say harvest or clear, certainly to potentially exceed their permit. I've visited several of the sites over the weekend, and I would agree that as far as the physical damage visible from the street, it's not much. The damage on the canal side, which is where most of the work is being done, is pretty dramatic. And what these folks are talking about as far as runoff would appear to be a significant risk. And when you incentivize that contractor to remove more or just right up to the edge of his permit or maybe exceed his permit a little bit, probably not going to be discovered, that would appear to me to be sort of a false economy. And we're going to burden the taxpayers. Now, it may not be our taxpayers in the city so much as the taxpayers that fund FEMA. And I know that there's a rush to get this done so we can bill FEMA and get reimbursed for the efforts of these contractors. I would suggest that Public Works could maybe ride these contractors a little more definitively and if we're going to continue this program. I know that the charge here is to stop the program. I don't know whether that's going to happen or not. But I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
My name is Dan Carney. I reside at 2230 Southeast 27th Terrace. I guess my concern is the lack of activity on the part of the city in overseeing this kind of process and how it was allowed to proceed without any oversight from the city government. At least that's my perception. Unless you guys want to take credit for the destruction that's taken place. I think it's really important for all the citizens of Cape Coral to maintain whatever wildlife we've got. It's precious. A lot of it is either endangered or threatened. And I know a couple years ago there was some issues with like 4 Mile Cove where mangroves were illegally removed. City had to go in and spend a lot of money to clean that up. And I think you're almost getting yourself in a position again where you're going to have to deal with that with all these mangroves that have been removed along the banks. It's just not right. And I just don't understand how, and I know a lot of you folks are new, but I just don't understand how this kind of program could be put in place with no accountability. And it's up to the citizens that live there that have to come to you and tell you what's going on in your own city, in your own neighborhood. And one of the strengths of Cape Coral is its neighborhoods. I have family come down and visit from up north. I'm a Yankee, former Yankee myself. And what do they want to do? They want to see burrowing owls. They want to go on the canal. I have a boat. They want to go on canal tours and look at the birds and the wildlife. We're destroying the very reason that people come here. And we need to stop this. It needs to be fixed. So I thank you for your time. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, City Council. My name is Joanne Gruber, and I am a member of the Friends of Wildlife. I'm also the treasurer of the Wildlife Trust. I've lived here for about 9 years. I moved here because I was particularly interested in the wildlife, the marine wildlife, and then all the wildlife that is not marine wildlife, especially my beloved manatees. Like many of you, I was heartbroken in 2018 with the devastation of the Lake O releases. It was truly a heartbreaking moment. But we were told at that time that the solutions to stop the harmful discharges were years or decades in the making, right? It required federal, it required state, it required local governments to bind together to get funding, and we had to build long-term projects, right? We had to build dams and fix dikes, and we had to build water retention facilities. We had to restore the Everglades water tables. We had to correct the imbalances from sugar farming in the Everglades. We had to do all this stuff. It was going to take forever, blah, blah, blah. I'm heartbroken again today. I've looked at the pictures from my friends. I've looked at what's happening. This is heartbreaking. This doesn't take years to fix. This takes one phone call, Mr. Mayor, and City Council. It takes one phone call from you to fix this. It doesn't take years. You don't have to ask a lot of bureaucracies. I'm asking you to stop this bulldozing until you can get the environmental and wildlife issues addressed. Mr. Mayor, just say no.
Anyone else wishing to speak?
Pasha Donaldson, 2522 Southwest 35th Lane. Middle name is Trouble. Or Passionate. I don't even know where to begin. Most of you have gotten emails from me. I've been in contact with Public Works. I want to thank them for being very responsive. For the questions I've asked, some of them have been answered, some haven't been answered. I've spent the last 4 days out in the field talking to the workers, at which point they stopped talking to me because they got an order, don't talk to anybody. Some of the issues I have is those people who are walking the field that so-called are qualified from Tetra Tech to walk the fields and identify wildlife. Do they know what an indigo snake is? Do they know what a gopher tortoise burrow looks like when it's only 3 inches wide as opposed to a huge gopher tortoise burrow? And the answer given to me was yes, in this one incident, the person grew up here in Cape Coral and is familiar with it. Lots of people grew up here in Cape Coral, but they're not familiar with it. They're not certified, they're not trained. The people out in the field, I don't understand why they weren't trained from the beginning. We're already into February, this started in November. I don't understand why Fish and Wildlife wasn't consulted. When you all do the UEP, you do an excellent job. You hire a firm, environmental firm. It takes 2 years for them to walk the properties that are going to be destroyed with the roads and mark every burrow in order for them to support it, to send it to Florida Fish and Wildlife to get approval for the permitting. This was not done here. This is just flat out, go and do what you need to do. When I get the excuse that, yes, I had to get to that branch that was hanging over the water, and all of a sudden you see the whole row destroyed, that's unnecessary. I've been out there, I witnessed it. I saw rabbits running into the street getting killed. I've seen dead snakes on the road. I have pictures of all these things. I have the documentation of the befores and the afters. I have letters, I have phone calls of people saying, what is going on with this city? This is not something that's going to be repaired overnight. This is changing the ecology of our waterways, the most precious thing we have here in Cape Coral, 400 miles of beautiful wildlife, because whether they're native or not native trees and brush, the wildlife loves it. That's what they need. We're in the middle of nesting season. What's going on here? The middle of nesting season for our real snowbirds that come down and migrate and have their babies here, and bring thousands of people from all over the world to photograph these things that support Cape Coral, the gas stations, the hotels, the shops, etc. Is the EPA involved? Probably not. I'll be glad to discuss anything afterwards with anybody who has questions.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak during citizens' input? Seeing none, citizens' input is closed. I think before we open up for council for discussion, let staff respond. And then after that point, then I'll open up for council members. Yes, that's okay with everyone.
Good morning, Mayor. Public Works looked into this yesterday and the day before. I think Mike Ilchison, our Public Works Director, is here, as well as Terry Schweitzer, our Solid Waste Manager. And they provided an update to me yesterday, and they'll share that with you this morning as well.
Thank you.
Good evening, good morning, Mayor and Council. First, I want to thank every one of these members of our public that came here to speak this morning. Their advocacy is real, and I don't want them to think that we are not listening. As Pasha just indicated, we've tried to supply them with everything they've requested. We've had phone discussions. I committed to her that I would go out in the field, I would speak to debris contractors, I would speak to debris monitors, I would observe crews, and I've done that. And Terry and I have both looked at ways to improve what we're doing, and we're continuing to do that. So I'm going to let Terry talk about the process, but I have several pictures, and I'm just going to show a few to give you an idea of where we've been and where we're heading. This is my 5th activation in the city of Cape Coral, my 3rd that has required vegetative debris removal and C&D removal. So we've done this in the past. Their level of advocacy has not been here in those previous storms. They're here now, and we accept what they're advocating on behalf. And they are a part of our community just like any other group. But the task that Terry and I have is to deal in fact and to deal in the regulatory scope that we have. I was out in the field with Lee County Sheriffs because I'm also coordinating some efforts to get trash and litter off our roads. And this morning, the Lee County Sheriffs is off of Burnstore, so I was up there. But I heard several people call me and say, "This is important," and it is important. So let me just kind of explain the process. I understand that they indicate that there's green vegetation being removed, and I do not dispute that. I've seen it, I've been there, I've observed it, and it is unfortunately part of the recovery efforts. So, the green stuff comes from 2 places. And I'm going to use some photos here to show an example, and this is not exhaustive. Monday, we were out with FEMA and the National Resource Conservation Society agency. We agree that there are issues that may result in the bank being erosion. So this is an example of a previous storm. You can see right here where there's a giant half moon and the trees were cut. That is the remnant of the same thing, that same mitigation measure that's required by the Army Corps of Engineers from a previous storm. Immediately next to that is this. Our Army Corps permit requires that that contractor cut that tree and take away all of the material that is left. Do you see the color of the vegetation on that tree? It's all green. And that tree and the vegetation from that will remain green for up to 4 to 6 months. So even though there is stuff up from the bank originating from trees that have upheaved the entire bank, the entire trunk and all the leaves on those trees can remain green for 6 months. Now, to get to that site, there's also vegetation in front of it. And it could be native. There's no differentiation between native and non-native species. That happened to be an Australian pine, which is a non-native species. But if there's a sable palm, a pine tree, a native species to Florida, and the contractor, we have to get to that to remove it, they are authorized to remove that green stuff to get to it. And so in an effort to get to clearing it, just as if you were responding to a forest fire, there's destruction happening from the fire, but to get to it and to create the fire break, you have to eliminate some green stuff. It's a part of the process. It's not perfect. I understand what they're advocating, and I know, and we realize that. The contractors and the debris monitors, their job is to make sure that it's not the free-for-all that is being described. So the end result of that is going to be, they're going to saw cut it, they're going to remove all that green canopy, plus anything to get to it, and then they're just going to fold it back. We met with the National Resource Conservation Society earlier this week, and we did a field tour to the crews. We did a field tour of some previous areas, and we were advised these activities are going to likely be, and we will likely get a letter that indicates that it is an eligible activity for shoreline restoration, shoreline refurbishment, plantings, whatever they think they can do to help us. The problem that we're going to have is they also told us in that same meeting they have no funding available to even help us. So the letter is likely going to say, this is an eligible activity. We understand that this isn't the best restoration possible, but there is an Army Corps permit that requires you to just fold it back. But unless we get money from the federal government, we probably can't help you. In addition to that, Terry and I reviewed the practices and the policies that the monitors and the contractors have. There's no requirement per se that says that they have to be an ecologist or there has to be an ecologist on site. I understand the value that they provide. I would suggest that not every one of them is an ecologist and goes out and marks burrows for us. But that doesn't mean what they do is not valuable or has no value for the species. So we're going to do the same thing. We're setting up a training for all the contractors to go a step above and beyond, so take them into the office, provide them the training from a certified ecologist and a licensed practitioner who can scope burrows and take species according to permits, and provide them with the additional knowledge. Pamphlets have already been given out to them. They have identifying paperwork so that they know what to look for. But have they received the level of training that we would provide our own staff? We're not sure of that, but we're going to make sure that they get that, to take it one step above and beyond. It's our job is to continue to improve our processes and what we do. In addition to that, Terry has set up with the monitors and the debris contractors. You heard that there are burrows out there that are not marked, and we agree with that. So what have we asked all of them to do, and started this week? We've asked them, when they identify a burrow that is not marked, not staked, to contact Terry, and Terry is contacting our GIS staff to add that burrow to our database. And already yesterday, he had 2 reports from our members that are working on this reporting boroughs that were not marked and unknown. So we've now engaged them to assist in providing data back to us for the management of the protected species moving forward. So what we're continuing to do is take this program and make it better. Yes, there's always things we can do in any facet of life to make it better, and that's our job. We agreed, we understood that they had concerns. I made commitments to Ms. Donaldson, to Pasha, that I would go out there and find ways to improve the project, improve the program. We're going to amend our debris management plan to have some of these things for all activations moving forward. And that's where we're at. I'm going to let Terry kind of talk about the process and how the payment is not per pound, just for factual stuff, just to clarify some things. It is by cubic yard. So could there be a perverse incentive that somebody's incentivized to grab more? Yes. Pound, cubic yard, it's still a unit of measurement. But that's why we have monitors on site, independent, that verify the stuff that's taking out is hurricane generated, broken, green, fallen, and then that's eligible for reimbursement. They're not associated with the contractor. They have no incentive to take out more than what's required. In fact, their incentive is to make sure that they only allow them to take out what's there, because if there is a problem with what they're taking out, then we go after them and say, you allowed an ineligible activity. So the process has inherent checks and balances. If there was no monitor, I would completely agree with this statement that they're just going to go grab everything they can. But we have an independent monitor with every single crew verifying, walking the site, and identifying. Let me let Terry go through this. One more thing, and I know I copied one of the individuals. So we keep getting emails and concerns about we're running over boroughs and taking species. There was a report this week of basically with a picture of a borough that the tractor marks basically went right over it. And I know there was at least one council member who expressed disappointment with that. So we did an investigation of that to find out what happened. That contractor, yes, that contractor lives in the Cape, has grown up here, is raising a family here, has performed work for the city in previous activations, so is not an out-of-state contractor. He knows what he's looking for. We spoke with him and he said, absolutely not. That borough was not there when we did this work. It was right basically on the high point of a swale. There was no evidence of any broken stakes. The stake that was there was brand new. The wood wasn't weathered. It was clearly brand new. The sand that came out of the borough was only about 1 inch or 2 inches high, which is not indicative of a borough that has been there for very long. The tire tracks did not mix the soils. It was not through the sand. The sand was on top of the track. I personally went and knocked on the neighbors' doors to find out, was that borough there? And I spoke to a neighbor who told me, absolutely not. That is a brand new borough. The monitor said it wasn't there. The soils weren't mixed. The stake is brand new. We checked our GIS layer for lot mowing because I don't know if you all know this, we, in our lot mowing program, pay contractors to perform a special type of clearing around boroughs. They don't go through there with the big bat wing. They actually go there with smaller equipment and clean around the boroughs within the protection zone. It wasn't on there. It wasn't on our GIS layer for permitting that puts a permitting suspension for if someone wants to build a new home. It was added this week. So we get reports, but the data doesn't validate, and none of the testimony, none of the pictures, the residents who live right across from the street from that do not support that we're just recklessly going over boroughs. But when they're reported, please be assured, we're going to investigate. We are going to look into it and look at every angle we can.
Mike pretty much covered all of it. Just a little, we are not doing debris or land clearing on behalf of any future growth or contractor's behalf. Part of that misconception comes from the way we have to approach it from the land removal operations, land-based removal operations. We have to travel from the roadway down the easement to the back of the lot and then work on the back easement of the lot. So there is some removal of vegetation that's incidental to the actual removal of the vegetation debris, which right now, of the 400,000 cubic yards, 395,950, somewhere around there has been the vegetation. So some of that is included, that is covered under the permit. And then the same type of process, the stumps aren't flush cut. They have to have some height to it. So that is part of it. I've been out to many of the sites myself, on some that Mike hasn't been to, investigating, even proactively spot checking the crews to make sure that they're following the permits. The monitoring firm has, I guess, I think I mentioned it last week or the week before in a council meeting, is an instance where there was a nest. Weren't sure if it was an eagle's nest or what type of nest. The work was stopped until it was confirmed what it was and make sure that the required buffers were in place for that work to continue. There's been, again, I've mentioned where there's been scrub jays, where they've stopped and had not even cleared the debris around where that scrub jay has been located. So there are processes in place to ensure the wildlife. And that's really the biggest, or I don't want to say misconception, but I can understand from people's points of view why it looks the way it looks. And with that being said, we're open for questions.
Thank you. I'll open up for council discussion. Councilmember Cosden.
Thank you, Mayor. So I do have a couple questions before I give my comments. So it's my understanding that we do have to clear healthy vegetation to get to the downed. Is that what you're saying? That's why we're taking so much?
That is correct.
And there's no other way?
Correct.
Okay. And the roots that we're leaving roots, right? To keep it from doing what was described, eroding and all that.
That is correct. That was part of the Corps permit to make sure we leave root systems to help prevent future erosion.
Okay. Can we cite these contractors if they do violate our ordinance? Do we protect the
So
village now?
they are responsible for any property damage. So if there is an ordinance violation or something, absolutely, they would fall under that as, if it was within the emergency permitting or outside the emergency permitting process.
For example, if one were to drive over a borough and we have it on video, could that be used to cite a contractor?
We would have to check the emergency declaration that the governor signed and see if a take permit is required while that emergency declaration is intact.
Okay. And finally, FEMA is paying for this, correct? Or part of it?
That is correct. It falls under the, the FEMA reimbursement policy, so it's not directly paid by the taxpayers of Cape Coral. It follows the same process as the right-of-way, 30-day, 90-day reimbursement.
And the trucks are only driving in the easement. They're not just going straight through lots, right? Or they shouldn't be.
They shouldn't be, correct. If it's a city-owned lot, they can go through the middle of the lot. If it's a privately owned lot, then they're required to use easements.
Okay, and then what kind of certification or wildlife expertise do the monitors have?
They're not, as Mike had mentioned, they're not required to be biologists or any type of certification like that. We provided them early on, information on burrowing owls, gopher tortoises, things like that. And then if there's a question that comes up about some sort of wildlife, the work stopped and we talked about it.
Are we sending the unmarked burrows the information to Friends of Wildlife also, so they can mark them?
We're going through the 311 process to have our environmental division go out and verify that it is truly a gopher tortoise or a burrowing owl or some other species, and then the city's taking the marking.
The city is marking them?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay, I didn't realize that we did it. I thought we shared with the Friends of Wildlife and they did the marking. Is that not correct? I guess it
We
used to be.
can't, they're proactively out doing it. We've had numerous meetings in the past about their activities. One thing that comes up with the Friends of Wildlife and the Wildlife Trust that you all may not know is that they're not a certified agent of the city or a certified agent of the state. So when they go onto private property, if they're doing it without permission, in theory, they could be told to leave. But we understand the value of what they provide because we don't have enough staff to do it. So, but when we are identifying it, we can go out and we can do that, yes.
Okay,
But the magnitude of the service they provide, we don't have enough staff to do that.
I know, we're very fortunate to have them to do that. Something about this just isn't right to me. I feel like we could do more. I don't know how, but maybe reconsider the contracts that we have, because what I'm hearing doesn't match what people are seeing and sending me. Videos and pictures and just descriptions, it doesn't match. So I don't know if we need to monitor the monitors, reconsider who's doing this. For the city that just had an event featuring a burrowing owl, I just don't think we're doing enough. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Councilmember Shepherd.
First of all, I'd like to thank all the people that came out this morning that are dedicating time to protect our wildlife. I respect you all for what you do. I'm very thankful for what you do. I also want to thank staff for educating us on the process, and it seems to me like there's no intent of malice. I think staff respects wildlife as well, and it seems to me that they're going to do what they can to improve, and I think that's why you people are very important. You brought attention to what was going on, and I think staff is responding well, and I think they're going to make every effort to improve the process. And thank you.
Councilmember Cummings.
I would also like to thank you. Wildlife is very important and also important to me too. I have a couple questions for you, Terry or Mike, who can ever answer these. Don't we scope out an area before you go in and start cleaning it out? And if so, can't we notify them to let them know, hey, we see some wildlife here and we need to put them in a different environment for their safety? Is there any type of protocol like that in place as of right now?
Well, there is some pre-work done, as you mentioned, council member, that they go out and see what debris is there and how it needs to be removed, whether it's land-based or marine-based, or what part of the easement they have to go down, either we'll just say on the left side or right side, the most cost-effective way to get to that debris. If they come across those gopher tortoises, burrowing owls, or other wildlife, then that's when they have to stop and say, okay, we got to reevaluate what we're doing here.
So during this process, was this area scoped out though, before you brought the bulldozer in to start doing removal?
That's what they do. They walk the lot or the site where the debris is to see how they're going to approach it, and what they're going to need to get to it, if they can get to it.
Okay, so from my understanding, they're saying that there were some wildlife nests in that area. And I know there are protocols that has to be done through the city. Do you guys notify them to let them know, hey, we're about to clean this area out. You want to send your volunteers, your crew to come and scope it out just in case we overlooked something?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not quite understanding. Mike might have a better insight on the question.
When you say do we notify them, do you mean Cape Coral Friends of Wildlife?
Yes.
So just to roll back a few seconds ago, they're not an agent of the city and they're not an agent of the state that we know of. I've verified that with Development Services. So we cannot authorize them, they're not a contractor of ours, to go onto private property and perform work. I'm not saying what they do is not valuable. We know what they provide and we know the services that they do. When we engage an agent and make them an agent of the city, we sign a formal contract with them. We make sure that they have proper insurances, that they have proper licensure. So there's a series of things that we have to do from a risk perspective to make sure we have the appropriate people on the property. So what we're trying to do is, we do have agents performing this work that are on the city's behalf. And so what we're trying to do is now make sure that they have knowledge. We're trying to provide them an even greater level of knowledge based on our city having the population of burrows that we have for both burrowing owls, gopher tortoises. The eagles are here in nesting season. So we're trying to make sure that they have intimate knowledge of those protected species that we have in the city.
Thank you. Here's another question I would like to ask. Is there any possible way, and I know we're waiting on the FEMA funds to come through, that we can help rebuild this habitat? What can be done?
Are you saying what other agencies are we bringing in?
Yes.
So that's what we did earlier this week. We had the National Resource Conservation Service. They were in town. Terry and I met with them in the morning with FEMA. We went out and did a tour to several crews, some areas of work that were already performed. To be very candid, they understand the reason that the Army Corps wants us to leave the root ball, but they don't necessarily agree that that is the best erosion control protection method. And so they're trying to bridge that gap. How do we, when you pull back that root ball, there's still a hole between that, right? I mean, so there's still room for erosion to occur. I have another example to show. I mean, this was a live oak, probably about 10 inches in caliber, and you can see the whole thing fell over, and then there's still a ridge, even when they pull back that stump and that comes back. And then again, similar to the other, here's the entire canopy. I mean, it was still green, but it was in the water. So this is why I say I understand that you're going to see green stuff. And it's coming from two places. It's either coming from the vegetation that was fallen, or it's coming from them trying to get to it. But we're working with other agencies. We're not done. We've only reached out to NRCS. We're going to contact DEP. We'll contact the South Florida Water Management District and see if any of these other agencies have any funds available to try and bridge that gap between what the Corps is requiring and what we're doing. Again, this is not something, I have pictures of previous events and what it looks like once it's regrown. So it's somewhat effective. It's not perfect, but our task is to try and continuously make the project program better. And we're reaching out to other agencies to see if any of them can help. NRCS was very blunt with us and said, we see what's happening. We agree that this is, we know that the Army Corps wants that. We think you could do a little better and we could probably help you. But right now they have no funding. And they said that's probably what the letter is going to say.
All right. And one more question. If you wouldn't mind just letting the viewers know, how can a resident identify a burrowing owl's nest as it's being marked? Do you use the sticks, PCP piping? How can they identify it as a resident? And if it's not identified, like you said earlier, and they feel that it needs to be identified, to dial 311, correct?
Correct. They can dial 311. They can use the app on their mobile device or go on the website. Under the environmental division type, there is a request type to report a burrowing owl, gopher tortoise, eagle's nest, things like that, so that environmental can follow up on it. And it will have most the burrows will have a white PVC stake. And then if you see the crossbar on it, then that's going to indicate that there's an owl's, and otherwise it's probably going to be gopher tortoise, to my understanding. I'm not the environmental division, but that's what I've seen out in the field, so. And the debris contractors are well aware of the staking and their buffer zones.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Hayden.
Mike or Terry, a lot of the pictures we received showed a lot of trash. Was that trash that had just been collected in the debris left behind or in the vegetation that was there? And I guess the second part of that is, as they clean out these areas, can they also pick up the trash?
Yeah, so what they do, council member, is they pull the debris out, they put it out in the right-of-way, and then they come by later to collect it. The vegetation is marked typically with either a green or an orange ribbon to identify it as separate vegetation from what was the right-of-way collection, and then the same thing with the C&D. What they have to do on the C&D is direct haul it. So once they pick that up from the right-of-way, then they have to haul it right to the landfill. And because of the size of the trucks, they make sure they have a truck full to make it cost-effective. They have all those marked, then they go back around and pick them up. So that debris may sit there in a vacant lot for a few days before they pick it up, so.
That would include paper cups, anything like that as
As
well?
far as litter itself, whatever they can pull out of there, they're, much like the, I guess the way to say it is it's not an acute, like they're litter picking per se. They're doing just wholesale debris removal, like the downed trees, the vegetation, porta potties, docks, trash totes, bulk type stuff is what they're
Yeah,
grabbing.
if we could make maybe a little bit more of a concerted effort on the other trash
Okay.
as well.
I'll certainly mention that to them.
It was mentioned about mangroves being removed. Are we taking every precaution necessary to save the healthy mangroves, because we know how important they are?
Yeah, so that's something that I need to follow up on where that was, because to my knowledge, they haven't been in anywhere where there's been any mangroves, but they are aware of that process. And I actually spoke with a monitoring firm yesterday, because there's, I forget if it's I think it's the South Spreader, I don't remember exactly where it was, but there was an area where they were talking about, somebody had mentioned that there's some damaged mangroves. So I've asked the monitoring firm to go out ahead of them, make sure that it is actually eligible for it to be removed.
It's Eco Park. So the Eco Park kayak trail coming out of the park has some mangroves that have been damaged by the storm. And this is where we're reviewing with our monitoring firm and the debris contractors. Some, and in some cases all, of the regulatory permitting related to protected species gets suspended when there's an emergency declaration of the governor. That doesn't mean we're going to go out there and just take out mangroves. We've reviewed the process. We understand there's a form that indicates where's the location, what is the purpose, and that there's at least a record of that activity. So we're in the process of reviewing that with them right now before we even go in by boat to that Eco Park trail and remove the mangroves. But some of them are incidental to if they're embroiled with an Australian pine that tips over, and you have to pull that whole thing out. So that's part of the process that we're trying to identify before they get into that southeast region where there's all the kind of mangroves mixed into some of this debris.
And we're documenting those areas where mangroves may have been removed, so when restoration efforts may start and any grant funding that might be available for those, that we can go back into those areas and restore a little bit.
Yeah, so our understanding right now, we're reviewing this process before they get into, is that there's a form that you fill out to the DEP, and that basically indicates, as part of the debris removal activity, here was a location that had mangroves, here's why they were being removed or taken out.
And
so there'll be a record of that, of all those locations.
And to your knowledge at this point, we have not lost any tortoises or owls in our efforts to clear debris.
That is correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I'm going to go to Councilmember Steinke first, and then Councilmember Cosden. I'll go back to you.
Thank you. I just, in our council meeting last week, I just want to make sure that I understood what I heard and have it repeated here if it's true. When these trees have fallen and they have to be removed, it's not just necessary to clear what's required for the trunk, but it's also required to clear what's necessary to get the canopy of the tree that needs to be removed out of there. And so, A, is that true? And B, is there any attempt to, potentially drag over instead of clearing the vegetation to get the canopy out versus, a total clearing to get the canopy out?
That is correct. There's been some areas, and I don't have them off the top of my head, where that exact process has happened. They do, I guess, the most time-efficient, cost-effective way that they can get it. Yes, they are paid by the cubic yard of any of the debris or anything that they remove, but to your point, council member, if they have to do something to get to the canopy, then they got to remove more debris or more vegetation to get to it, then that's what they'll have to do. So.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Cosden.
Thank you. Just one more quick thing. Terry, I think I heard you say they are watching for marked burrows, right?
Correct.
But can we provide them from our GIS a list of burrows, marked or unmarked?
That is, well, what we have in the GIS is the known burrows. And that also includes the burrowing owls, gopher tortoises, eagles, and ospreys, I believe are what's on that link. They have it. And what happens is that also gets spread out to their team, so the monitors have that link. And when they're going into an area, wherever they're going to be at, then they can look at that link, zoom in to see what's known. And then they also, they've been given some guidance on what to look for as far as a new fresh burrow. Like they know what a burrowing owl burrow looks like. They know what a gopher tortoise burrow looks like. And then if they see a large nest in a tree or if they see eagles flying around, they'll also be on the lookout for that as well. And then, like I said, they're reporting it up through me to get the environmental division to go out and check it out.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and real quickly for me, first, before I get into my comments, I'd like to thank your organization for what you do. You definitely provide a service that we can't because of either manpower or money. So I want to thank each and every one of you and all your members, what you do for the community. And like I believe it was Carl that mentioned that, I've always said you have to try to find that balance between development and our wildlife. And this particular endeavor, as we all know, is very well regulated by the Army Corps of Engineers and FDEP, and you have to have a permit. And the criteria is always extremely explicit in the permit. Now, for me, I want to make sure that we police ourselves to make sure that we are working within the confines of the specified permit. And I think that's our responsibility as a city to make sure that happens, whether it's Tetra Tech, who's our independent monitors, or the subcontractors that do that removal. It still falls upon us to make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to do. So I just want to make sure, and it sounds like we are, but I want to make sure that they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's during this process. Is this a process that is needed? In my opinion, it is. I mean, this is hurricane debris that has to be removed from the canal to make sure we don't have that debris sitting around on the shoreline. It is not impacting the canals now, or it won't impact the canals into the future. As you saw in some of these pictures, a lot of these trees are still alive, but there's going to come a point in time that they will die, and they could cause additional problems into the future. So I understand that we have to remove that debris. We just got to make sure that we're doing it the right way. So it sounds like staff is a little more attentive since they have brought a few concerns forward. So I just want to make sure that we continue to do that as a city. Carl made a comment that he didn't think any of the council, except for Councilmember Cosden, was concerned with the environment or was a stakeholder in their organization. And I just wanted to remind their organization and everybody that's watching, I've been here about 3 or 4 years. We've given this organization, and most recently, just a few weeks ago, first time that we did it was a $100,000, basically a grant, so they could pay for UEP projects on their parcels, and we just did that again. So over the last 3 or 4 years, we've contributed $200,000 to your organization. So for him to come forward and say, we're not a stakeholder, I take offense to that. I also know that not only myself, Councilmember Hayden was at your Bury Now event, the Owl Groundhog Day, just a few weeks ago. I know that many council members have attended your Bury Now's festival. So for someone to come up to the podium and say that we're not stakeholders, we're partners with you, I take offense to that, because I think we are, and we will continue to be. But we will move forward from that. But I felt it was worth at least noting, because I think the city do engage with you. Even though you may not be a recognized vendor in the city, we know that your assistance is needed in our city, and we appreciate everything that you do, and we will continue to be your partner. As far as this instance, just like any other times that we have to remove debris on the shorelines, it's very well regulated, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of all my council members here. We just want to make sure that we're dotting our I's, crossing our T's, and so hopefully we'll make sure that we do that. Councilmember Cummings.
Excuse me. I have one more question. Knowing it's nesting season, do you have a game plan put together in this area of where you're cleaning the debris for the wildlife that could be coming back? You may not see it now, but knowing that's their home.
Yeah, so we've actually made the contractors aware of the upcoming nesting season. Actually, it looks like maybe the owls, a couple of them started a little bit early from last weekend, but yes, they are aware of the migratory birds and things that are going to be starting to nesting.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And also thank you, Mayor, for saying what you said, because I do know we all talk about wildlife and we love our wildlife, so we all feel like it's very important to each and every one of us. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda, item 5 is roundtable, is item 4B, discussions. B1 is the city attorney executive search presentation. Before we get to that, if our HR director, Lisa, can maybe come up and give us a segue into that presentation and what we've done to get to this point.
Lisa Sonego, Human Resources Director. Yes, today you wanted to discuss the city attorney, the recruitment firm, and I believe they are online. We've had a little bit of a meeting delay for them, so I want to verify that. Kimberly, are they online?
They are. Let me just check in the back to have them.
Sure.
There we go.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. All right, so yes, we will have NARLOC introduce. We spoke about this last week at the special meeting, and we wanted to make sure, per your request, to have the firm available. So we have Renee NARLOC, and she is able to speak to her firm and get into some next steps as you see fit. Your intent was to have her do a small presentation, review some past information, et cetera, and kind of open the floor to you all to have a conversation on your needs, et cetera. And then there was a second part, my understanding to today is we have the a pay study and some other semantics that go along with that, but this was the main aspect for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Excellent, it's working. I will leave you to it.
We appreciate you being here this morning, and I guess what we're looking for as a council is, to give us some background on maybe other types of searches that you have done in the past. If you could give us any advice moving forward, and also, what type of qualifications does your firm look for when you're trying to fill a city attorney's position?
Thank you, Mayor Gunter. And it's very nice to be part of this meeting today. I thank you so much for the opportunity. Good morning, Mayor and council members. I'm Renee Norlock. I am with Norlock and Associates. We are a public sector executive search firm. We are in Tallahassee, Florida, and we have many years of doing executive searches in the public sector, many in Florida, many city attorneys over the years, and we are thrilled to be talking with you today. A little bit about what we have experienced in the past when we're looking for city attorneys. Oftentimes, of course, as you can imagine, they have to be licensed by the bar, have a legal license with the Florida bar, but also probably in general about 10 years of significant local government experience at a senior level, maybe as an attorney or an assistant attorney in a city or a local government. As you can imagine, being licensed by the Florida bar, that limits our pool some. But that said, there's plenty of great attorneys who have served in the capacity of a city or county attorney over the years that we would be looking for. Some of the other types of things that we typically look for are, that they have had a lot of legal experience, probably transactional as well as litigation experience, administrative law, trial law, appellate work probably at some point. We would look for people who probably have worked in either similar size agencies to the city or larger organizations. Perhaps they served as a deputy or, as I mentioned, assistant city or county attorney at a larger organization. Some of the things that we, traits that we look for in candidates would include someone who's very approachable, very collaborative, very accessible, knows how to remain apolitical, and certainly ethical. And I'm going to say people who are easily understood, and what I mean by that is really can break down legalese for people like me, to really connect with people on issues. I would expect a new city attorney to come in and want to assess the workload that is there, the resources that are there, and just really get a feel for if they come from the outside, meaning external to the organization, really get a feel for what is important to the organization and focus on that. I would be interested in asking them about when they choose to use outside counsel and when they keep it in-house. And also probably be looking for something I typically get a lot of requests for lately are attorneys who provide options to you. The answer is not no automatically. They instead bring options to you. They're not risk averse. They don't advise from a position of being risk averse, but instead bring you some good options, share with you what the risks are related to those options to give you some choices on how to move forward. I also am typically looking for people, again, who are a good fit for your organization. I mean, you've had a long tenured city attorney, so someone who's coming in behind that attorney will need to be a good fit, not only for the staff in the attorney's office, but for the organization as a whole and for the community as a whole. Some of the legal areas that are of interest relative to potential candidates would include environmental law, and then the others are sort of standard, if you will, in local government: purchasing, employment law, contracts, open public records, which is important in Florida, as you know. I mentioned labor law, labor and employment law, constitutional law, land use, zoning, and even appellate work, as I mentioned earlier. So there's a large span of different types of legal experience that we would look for in a city attorney for you. I think beyond that, we're just looking for someone, again, who can come in and fit in, that can build trust quickly with you and with the community and with the staff, and understand that they're there to serve everyone. That's what public service is. So I think that, just generally speaking, making sure that we have a right fit going into this, and we have a great process as far as how we do that. We are working closely with you and staff, Lisa in particular, to make sure that we have a really good process that brings you qualified candidates, gives you some variety in what those candidates bring to the table, and make sure that we have a clean process, one that stays on track, that we don't lose traction or get sidetracked in it or delayed in any way, and get you to the end game as quickly as possible, without sacrificing the quality of the process, and ensuring that we run a nice, clean process that cannot be questioned, that's above board, and that we're not only taking care of you as the board in this process, but taking care of the candidates as well. So with that said, I'm going to take a breather here just to answer any questions, if there's any other questions you have, or anything I can fill in along the way.
Thank you. Before I open it up to the floor for council, if you could just reiterate what you felt the minimum requirements should be for a city of our size. I think that's important. I know that's a discussion that we will have collectively here today, so I just want to make sure that we have a clear picture of what your firm and your expertise feels that the minimum requirement should be.
Thank you. Certainly, a license to practice law in the state of Florida is required. I would suggest and recommend at least 10 years of progressively responsible legal experience, with an emphasis on local government, municipal and civil law. I wouldn't require this. So the things I just mentioned, I think, should be requirements. As far as preferences, Florida municipal experience and experience in several areas of municipal law, including some of those that I mentioned. That was environmental, constitutional, land use zoning, purchasing, employment. So again, I think that would be covered in the requirement that they have at least 10 years of progressively responsible experience in municipal or local government law.
Thank you.
If they have that experience, they would have touched on all of those areas. So at a very minimum, you've got to be licensed to the bar, got to have at least 10 years of progressively responsible, senior level legal experience. And then from there, it's preferably in a community the size of Cape Coral or larger, and in those variety of areas.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll open the floor up for council to ask any discussions. I think today is for this event is kind of a two-part process here. One being to engage or ask any questions of this particular firm, and then at the end of this process, then as a council collectively, I think we have to make sure that we identify collectively what our minimum qualifications should be for advertising purposes for the firm. I think that's very important. So with that, I'll open up the floor. Councilmember Steinke.
Thank you, and thank you, Renee, for being with us. I've got one comment and then one question. And the comment is in your, if you will, qualifications and then preferences. On the preference side, something that's important to me is that I think what's more important to me is not that the individual has experience with municipal law, but with experience with a growing municipality. While we are the size that we are today, from a study that we've had done, we are looking in relative short order to being twice the size that we are today. And so having that experience in a growth-oriented environment rather than just a static environment in their history would be important to me as a preference. And the other is just a question, with your finger on the pulse of what's going on with qualified candidates that we would be looking for, what type of a time horizon do you think that we should be prepared for in this search?
Thank you, Council Member. I appreciate the emphasis on the growth of the community. That is an important factor. That brings about different legal challenges and different policies and procedures that need to be looked at from a legal perspective. And I certainly concur that that is a very good addition to the preferences. With regard to timeline, we have about I'm going to say about a 14-week process, but let me break that down a little bit. The first couple of months, we're doing a lot of things to tee this position up, to get it out there, to market it. We do want to do a national search. We understand that candidates have to be licensed in the state of Florida, but there's plenty of folks who are, who served in similar capacities that may have gone to another state for a time period and would love to come back. So we don't want to miss any of those candidates. In addition to that, we spend a lot of work on the front end doing outreach. People who would be great for this job are very busy now, more than likely. And it's our job to make sure we get their attention, let them know, talk with them, and really do what we're hired to do, which is recruit. So that said, we spend the first probably 6 to 8 weeks teeing up the job and making sure that at the end of 6 weeks, we have a really good pool of candidates to assess and to evaluate. That's how we get a good pool of candidates, is by starting with an initial good group, including diverse candidates, including a lot of different backgrounds and experiences. That said, then we start our process of reviewing applications, making recommendations to you, and then getting candidates before you, which really could take probably another month, realistically. So I would say best guess between about 9 to 10 weeks from when we officially get started. We will we'll know who we're talking to. We'll have interviews set up. We'll know who we're talking to. Probably another couple weeks to really decide and dig down a little bit on who the selected candidate is. And then whoever that is, more than likely will have to give at least a 30 days notice where they are. Hopefully not any longer than that. So I'm going to say probably about a 14-week process. Put us into, it's believe it or not, the end of February now, hard to believe. So put us into probably mid-June. I will do a timeline. That's one of the first things I do. I send a tentative timeline to you with these milestones that I just described and attach dates to them for a couple of reasons. And I need you to take a look and make sure you're comfortable with it, but also know what to expect. In addition, there are at least two key dates on there where we have to get on your calendar. And we want to make sure we jump on that sooner than later so we don't have conflicts and we can strategize on how this timeline will actually look. So we'll know who we're talking to. We'll know who we like, probably maybe even decide within about 9 to 10 weeks. And then about a month later, we'll know who we're talking to, who we're extending an offer to, and a starting date for that candidate.
Thank you.
Before I go to Councilmember Hayden, just a real quick question for Councilmember Long, since this is your expertise. How long, if we identified a candidate that hadn't passed the Florida bar, how long would it take, or what is that process? Is it a long process? Is it a hard endeavor? And the reason that I ask this question, I think it's important for all of council, is we may find an exceptional candidate in Houston, Texas. So if that individual did have to come and pass the bar, I'm just curious how hard of an endeavor that would be.
Yeah, that's particular. Go ahead, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's particular to the individual. But I think, just for reference, coming out of law school, I think I spent like 12 weeks, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week to prepare for the test. And it's not one of those things where if you're an attorney that's practiced for some period of time that you could just come in here and take it, because like any other part of the education system, it's not really applicable to the real world. It's basically teaching you how to think. So I would expect that it would take them several months to try to train for taking that bar, especially considering that I wasn't employed at the time and these individuals would be. So they'd have to balance that as well. It's not something that could be done in a matter of weeks, I wouldn't say.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hayden.
Yeah, one of my questions, just to follow up on the candidates that may live outside of state, that may have their Florida license. How long is that license good for once you've left the state? Is it indefinite, or what's the period of time?
The candidates have to keep it active. It's I think it's a matter of money, and most of them do, because none of them really want to go through having to sit for the bar again in the state of Florida. But it also speaks to me to their strategy of their career, that they know someday they may want to be practicing in Florida again. I will probably not have anyone that's willing to go through the process to become licensed. However, there may be some that have already started that process. I may find someone in Texas, for instance, who did that last week or last month, and I would rather find that out and kind of time it to see when they would actually get results and what have you, because it is a requirement. There are other professions in the state of Florida that the state has become a little, I won't say more lax, because that's not what it is. It's just they've made it more accessible. Reciprocity has become easier for several professions that are licensed and regulated by the state of Florida. But law is not one of those, and certainly not yet. I don't know that that would change anytime soon.
So if you find a candidate that you think would be a good fit for this city and they've been out of the state for 10 years, it's just a matter of paying to keep their license up to date?
Yes, and that is one of the things that I will check as a search firm, is to make sure not only that they have the license, that it's up to date, but also to look for any kind of disciplinary action that may have been filed against their license during their time with the Florida bar. So I would not, I'll tell you the bigger question for me would be, in that case, if they've been out for 10 years, I would need to know that they haven't been so far removed from Florida law and from what you are dealing with specifically in your city and different challenges that are coming. I would need to know they could get up to speed rather quickly. If it's been, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, maybe 3 years, I'm probably more comfortable with that. If, again, depending on where they were before they left the state and how connected they still are, a lot of people who go out of state still are very involved in their training and their keeping up with what's going on in the industry in Florida if they have left out of state. Because again, they understand that they need to know what's going on. They don't need to lose their traction in Florida if they plan on coming back.
Let me bring it back to Florida then. It seems like your talent pool would be a little limited. There's only 7 cities in the state that are bigger than us. And initially, when you said 10 years of local government experience, you followed that with as an assistant city attorney or city attorney. Second time around, you said Florida municipal law experience. They may mean the same thing, but I'm concerned about the number of people based on your criteria that might be available to us as the 8th largest city. And I guess the follow-up to that is, have you placed a city attorney in the cities that are above us, like Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Tampa?
Yes, yes. I did place Fort Lauderdale's city attorney shortly after I placed their city manager. That was probably back in, I'm going to say 2013 or 14 maybe. I anticipate that I may be working with Seminole County on their county attorneys very soon. But that said, there is a limited pool because of the Florida bar requirement.
Right.
However, there are also a lot of private organizations that serve municipal governments. That's all they do. All of their clients are cities. So we have quite, it's not as large as I would like. It never is.
Sure.
But we have a pretty good sized pool of people who have had experience at different larger communities than Cape Coral. I will say this, it really comes down to how attractive the position is for potential candidates. And the good news is you're Cape Coral. And the good news is a lot of folks that might not consider other opportunities, I believe will be interested in Cape Coral. And we will dig down, we will talk to a lot of folks. In general, right now in the market, I'm seeing fewer candidates apply for positions. However, I'm still seeing good candidates apply for positions. So it will be up to us to really dig down and shake the bushes and talk to people who bring a lot to the table and can come in and really handle the job. I mean, you have a good sized attorney's office. You have about a dozen people in there, and that's a pretty good sized attorney's office. So to your point, we have our work cut out for us, but I feel confident that we'll find some great candidates.
And I had asked this last week, and I know once you've provided the list of candidates, the bigger part of your process is done, but what would you say your success rate is for a city picking from your list of candidates and that person staying in the job at least 4 years?
So we're going way back, Council Member, to I've been actually doing public sector recruiting since the early 90s. And I'm going to say success rate for at least 4 years is probably, certainly in the 90s, I'm going to say mid to high 90s. I will tell you with regard to city attorneys and county attorneys, we actually have a really good rate. The longest standing attorney was with Arlington County, Virginia. And I think he just left there last year, and he was there 23 years as county attorney. Okay. More recently, we did lead county attorney. Richard Wesch is the attorney there. That's been quite some time ago, probably 7 or 8 years ago at least, maybe 9. We did the Broward County attorney, Joni Armstrong Coffey. She was there at least 8 or 9 years. And the other one that comes to mind is Coconut Creek, Terrell Pyburn. First time city attorney job for her. And she's still there, I'm gonna say probably 9 years. It's really about, on the front end, assessing candidates for a good fit. And we're good at that. We have a good process to really nail that down. So to answer your question, I'm gonna say probably 95% plus.
And what would you say is a typical number of candidates, municipalities, and counties might ask for? Is that, look, we want a list of 10. We want your 10 top choices. Is it smaller than that, larger than that?
I think it's smaller than that. I will probably, on average, I'm going to say probably just every search I do, honestly, I talk to at least 10 to 12 folks. When I go through and kind of pull what I consider the cream of the crop, probably 10 to 12. After I talk with 10 to 12, I'm probably down to about, on average, 7 that I would recommend to you. And I would explain to you why I recommended them, what their strengths are, what any areas of concern are that I may have that we need to vet out further as we go if they're a preferred candidate. And usually I have councils and commissions that I'll then narrow candidates down to, again, maybe 5. Along the way, we may have someone drop out. We try to do a really good job on the front end to ensure that does not happen. But there are circumstances where it does. But I want them to drop out early, not after they've interviewed, and we're in negotiations. So I'm okay with that, but it'll whittle down a little bit sometimes to maybe you interviewing 5 candidates in person for the job. So those are typically the numbers I see. Starting with 10 or 12, I interview them, make recommendations of probably 7. You whittle it down probably a little bit more, and then we get down to our finalists that come in and interview with you. I want to make sure that the council understands my recommendations are just recommendations. I certainly will make them and stand by them and support them. However, you will know about all of the candidates who applied for the position. That's not information I keep to myself and only put out there the ones I recommend. You'll know who the other candidates are, and any information that you need on any candidate will be provided to you. So should you say, we like your recommendations, but we like this other candidate too, that's the prerogative, of course, of the council to do that. Typically, council will accept my recommendations. They see why, they understand why that I made those and feel there's a lot of value to those.
Yeah, I think, and just one last thing, I'm glad you mentioned land use and zoning, because Cape Coral is unique and that we're only 50% built out. So a lot of the ordinances that come before us deal with land use and zoning. So expertise in those areas will be important for us moving forward. And I thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Okay, I don't see any other lights on, so I'll jump in here real quick. For me, I understand that they have to be licensed with the Florida Bar. And with saying that, we understand that confines our search to the state of Florida. But it's not only municipalities. I heard you mention county attorneys as well. For me personally, I'm looking for an applicant with the experience of a city of similar size or greater, because I surely wouldn't want to hire an individual that is from another city in the state of Florida, 50,000 population. I think that is worlds apart to where we are as a community. And we not only, for me, it would at least have to be of a similar size city, because we are such a growing city. I mean, we're growing 10 to 15,000 people in population here recently. And if that continues, as Councilmember Hayden stated, we're going to be built out here soon. That, for me, is extremely important to make sure it's a similar size city. With a host of background that even the firm had mentioned, our search firm, because we are a unique city, land development, zoning, some type of labor law experience. I mean, there's a host of things. I think a city attorney needs to be a well-rounded type of individual, because there's so many different areas that our city attorney's office works with. And so I know we have outside attorneys that we work with as well, but if you have a person that applies that's got great environmental expertise, that's great. But if that's the only expertise that they have, for me, that's not the type of, I'm looking for a well-rounded type individual. I think this, one thing that was mentioned is how attractive the position is. And at some point today, and I guess my question to our search firm would be, do we typically set a minimum salary, or do we set a salary range when we, for you, so when you're out advertising, that is known? Or is that something that's negotiated later on? So I guess that's a question that I have. What have you done in the past regarding salaries?
Okay, thank you, Mayor. We would like, if it's acceptable to you as council, to advertise the position relative to salary as open and dependent upon qualifications. Couple of reasons. I never want to miss out on a candidate because of a number. I would rather at least put information out there and have them contact me or us contact them to have a conversation about that. What I like to do is present qualifications to you, but also let you know where this particular candidate falls, where they need to be relative to salary, maybe where they are now if I have that information, or if they're flexible. Because oftentimes candidates start looking at an opportunity and become more flexible as they discover that it's a great opportunity and that it would be a great time for them to make that transition both professionally and personally. So I don't like to lock us into numbers on the front end. That said, it's public information what your attorney has made in the past. It's public information what your city manager makes. Some organizations I've worked with do have sort of mirror the agreement with the city manager and the city attorney, considering that they both report to the council and they see them as kind of co-equal in some form. So I would like it to read as open, dependent upon qualifications. As I talk with potential candidates, I'll find out where they are. So when I present candidates to you, I'm able then to give you a range and say, these are the candidates I spoke with. These are the strengths they bring to the table. This is what I see, what I think. And by the way, this is the range that is before us. We have candidates on the high end that want to be here. We have candidates on the lower end that want to be here. And very quickly you may say, well, this candidate who's looking for $400,000 a year, we're not going to do that. Or it's kind of that person's kind of an outlier. We have great candidates within this range here, so we feel comfortable moving forward with these candidates. It's sort of an informal salary survey, if you will. It sort of determines what our range will be. And I think that's proven very good throughout our process to get us where we need to be. We don't want to get to the end and then talk about salary with candidates. We want to have some sort of informal discussion with them early on to make sure that we're in the ballpark. And once we're in the ballpark, then it becomes really, them looking into the opportunity, becoming interested, getting more excited about the opportunity. We don't want to lose candidates along the way to other opportunities. And as we've already talked about, we are somewhat limited in our pool. There are certainly other organizations that are looking for attorneys. I think your timing is good. I think you're getting out ahead of some other organizations that will be doing the same thing. So we don't necessarily want to have to compete with other cities right now, either for a city attorney.
Okay.
If I could, Mayor, I would like to mention one more thing. In setting up the parameters for minimum requirements, I would encourage you to, as opposed to the measurement of the city by population, to measure it more by perhaps the complexities or kind of what the community is going through, similar in complexities and challenges perhaps. The reason I say that is oftentimes in recruitment, we may be looking for someone to manage a city that's 20,000 in population. The 20,000 in population cities near me in Tallahassee are completely different. And perhaps some of them that might be in a Broward County that are nestled in, surrounded by big cities that have big city problems, but yet their actual population is small. So, and a lot of times that's where you find those fast growth communities. They may be nestled into, probably not Broward, they're built out, but nestled into a larger county that's experiencing a lot of fast growth. The outskirts of Orlando comes to mind, and others. So instead of tagging it with size of a city, perhaps, the complexities and challenges of similar challenges and complexities. And I do believe that candidates will understand what that means. And I'll certainly have that conversation with them whenever I have an opportunity to give them the backdrop on what you're looking for in Cape Coral.
Thank you. One last question for you. I think myself and Councilmember Cosden are the only council members up here that participated in a city manager search about 2.5 years ago. And if Councilmember Cosden, if my memory serves me correctly, and I heard, this particular search firm said maybe narrow it down to 7 recommendations. My question that we'll have to have answered here today, I think, is how is this process going to work? And we need to establish that process. Does the search firm narrow it down to 7 and we interview all 7? Or do we have a discussion collectively as a council, pick the top 5 and then do interviews? So my question, I know council will discuss that here later, but my question to you, ma'am, is what is your recommendation of the process? How has processes with other cities worked, and what is your recommendation as a council how we should approach this?
We have a lot of unknowns here in our process as of now. We don't know exactly how things are going to look, but I would say that again, it's difficult to have a number. I'll tell you this: if I had 5 really strong candidates, and I felt that's all I had as far as recommendations, that's what I'm going to recommend. If you want more candidates than that, we can look at the pool and decide who to bring. But there's a really strong delineation there between candidates that I recommend and don't, and it's for reasons. So I want to caution you about a specific number. I would say, again, on average, I like to bring you 7 candidates. I do that for variety. Some may have more experience than others. Some may appear to be on paper, and even in my interviews, our top candidates, but I may have someone who is maybe mid-career. This would be somewhat of a step up, but my gut tells me they have what it takes to do that. So I would bring you a variety of candidates in my 7 recommendations, let's say. And from there, really take the lead from you as a council of who you want to bring forward. All 7 of those could be just all strong. No one outshines anyone. We're going to the mat on this, all of them. We just don't know that yet, but what I'm not going to do is shortchange you or let you lose someone of quality based on numbers or where we end up. We will make it work so that you get to really assess the best candidates. I would say I would not recommend ever doing interviews with 3 or less. I would recommend that we go into interviews with more than 3 candidates scheduled. So again, I think we'll have some people who may drop out. It's possible. We may have, some situations beyond anybody's control where they can't move forward. That said, it could lessen our pool. So as far as the number of candidates that you want me to bring to you, if you make a recommendation, I would just recommend at least 7, knowing that if we're not at 7, I'm going to bring you 5 or 6. But also, the intent would be you can move forward with interviewing all 7 of those candidates, I think you're going to interview 5 candidates. I would recommend 3 to 5 candidates for interviews, and then either ask me to bring you 5, or if there's more than 5 that I think warrants recommendation, that I do that. I don't really want to be hedged in on the 5 candidates, because I just don't know how many great candidates we're going to have.
Yeah, I guess maybe those answers could be identified later once we know exactly what that pool of individuals are. That's a discussion I think maybe we could have later, once we see exactly how many applicants we have, and identify exactly what that process may be, whether, you know, we interview 5 and then we take it down to 2, and then, you know, maybe interview for a second time for the top 2 candidates. That's something that maybe at a later time, once we know exactly what that pool is, how we're going to move forward. So that's all the questions that I have for you. Thank you, and it sounds like this is at least about a 14-week endeavor, and I will move on to Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Renee. I do have a question. What is your percentage of attorneys that is seeking a position of a city of our size as a city manager? And with the qualifications we're looking for, such as zoning and land use, employment, business, environmental, purchasing, civil law, and constitutional, I'm just curious on how many applicants that you have received that is looking for something like this.
So I'm going to say my best guesstimate on the size of a pool of candidates, I'm going to say 25 candidates. And the reason I picked that number is because in the past it was more than that. In the last, I'm going to say 6 months or so, we've seen smaller pool of candidates, but still quality pool of candidates. I think it has to do with, it's no longer COVID. COVID was our issue for the last 2 or 3 years, as you can imagine. But now I think it's more about relocating. I think it's about the economy. I think it's about inflation and different factors that cause people to rethink, is this a good time for me to make a change? That said, probably housing is going to be a topic of discussion. I've literally had city manager searches where you would think that all the other terms of an agreement would be what we would be negotiating. Our biggest challenge was, where can this person live? Because there was no available housing in that particular community at the time. So our conversations changed a little bit, but you know, I don't have a concern. Let me underscore this. I don't have a concern about finding good quality candidates who have a broad spectrum of background in legal areas such as the ones that we have described. There are, and I'll give you an example. A city comes to mind that is about the size of Cape Coral. They have a large city attorney's office. They have some deputy attorneys and some assistant attorneys, because there's different layers in the office, that are very well versed in municipal law. They've been with the organizations or with others many years. They have been, and this is something I will look for, they have been moved around in the city attorney's offices to work on different things. You know, maybe they had employment law or environmental law or land use for many years, and now they have, public records, open records, and different kinds of work, often depending on what's going on in that particular city, much like with yours. So as far as finding folks who have that broad background, that I know we can do. There are a lot of great attorneys in the state of Florida that do that now, and that have that experience. Right. As far as candidates that we already have, we literally start searches brand new. I mean, we've got a database, that you can imagine, full of people that we will use as one of our resources. But we do go out and heavily recruit candidates for this job, particularly. You are the only attorney search that we are currently working on, and that's good. We recently did a city attorney search in Texas for a community of similar size in the Galveston area. And we were able to look at a lot of applicants who either had Texas experience or were looking to go there, some of which have Florida experience also. So there's recent searches, there's a database that goes back many, many years, but we do a fresh, active outreach. We will, quite frankly, search the Florida Bar website to find people who have experience and training at the Florida Bar for the disciplines that we talked about early, such as land use.
Okay, so that was my other question. So you were saying in the beginning that it looks like we had 25 candidates in your system, correct? And with those 25 candidates, how do you narrow it down to the 7 for us to interview? What makes you feel like those 7 would be the top out of the 25 if they have all the same qualifications that we are looking for?
So what we do is there's a lot of factors that go into that decision, much like in deciding who you're going to hire. We do things such as newspaper article searches, which is Nexus, is a system part of Nexus Lexis. We check and see what has happened in their backgrounds, not only relative to disciplinary action with the Florida Bar, but just personally. Have they been in controversies? Do they have something that they bring to the table that we just don't feel that would be a good fit for your city? So we do that early on. We also do preliminary interviews with them and dig into a lot of things. We get into the details of their background beyond what you see on paper. We want to know not only what they've done, we want to know that they've done it, not just the organization they were with. We want to know that it's their accomplishment. We want to know that they've been in challenging situations, that they've had some complex issues to deal with and have been successful in that. We want to know why they're interested in this job, what their motivation is. We want to know if there's any roadblocks to accepting the job. We want to know things like their management style. And we learn that by talking with them. We ask them questions that get to the heart of the matter and learn about who they really are, what they've really done, what they really bring to the table. And what happens is, interesting enough, is it starts to line up with what we know and what we've learned about your city and your needs. And as we move forward, we assess them in different ways to just really know that we have a strong, solid professional leader here who can come in, hit the ground running, has been there, done that in many instances relative to the needs of the city of Cape Coral. And so we do that through our interview process and our assessment of these candidates. Later on, there are other things that we add to the mix, including references to support our thoughts and our findings and our recommendations. We also, at some point, will do a background check to make sure that there's nothing out there that warrants further explanation or needs to be looked into further relative to candidates. We would certainly expect candidates to have a clean background. There's several things that we do throughout the process to assess these candidates. And when we present candidates, we share with you the 360, the picture of these candidates, why they were recommended, what makes them, why they made the cut, really. As far as some other candidates that maybe did not. We may have a candidate that, again, looks good on paper. And as I mentioned, there would be some that I would actually interview but not recommend. They look good on paper, and that's great. But once we had an opportunity to speak with them, it wasn't quite as strong. Their background and what they brought to the table wasn't quite as strong as we originally thought.
Thank you.
Councilmember Long.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, ma'am, for being here today. Thanks for your time This has been incredibly insightful. You clearly know what you're doing here. Obviously, you've been doing this for some time. Everything you said is given me confidence in the fact that you're going to present some quality candidates. But I think for our purposes here of trying to gain a consensus on the parameters, I'll just weigh in real quickly with my 2 cents on 2 different points. One of them is in agreement with some others that had said contextually with regards to background and experience, land use and planning would be something that would be critical considering where we're at in our growth period here in the city. And the other point, I guess, and I don't know how we create this in a parameter, but you had mentioned a couple different times about a 10-year minimum qualification in to some degree another a field of municipal law. And then on the second time you mentioned something about in a senior level type position. And so once we start thinking about that in context, I would be afraid if we cut that number at 10, and then again double down and create even more specific 10 at a senior level management. Now that's someone that's been in that career for quite some period. And so we got to remember that we're in a sort of, it's a double-edged sword. She had said that we're a desirable location for people, but we don't want someone coming here that's been in the career for quite some time and sees it almost as a retirement destination on the back end of their career. For me, I think it's just as important to catch somebody that's obviously experienced, that's been in a similar position or a similar locale that's gone through the ringer to the extent that we have here with a couple different issues related to growth. But it's equally important to me that we find someone that's still growing, that's still passionate about the work, that's still in a position where they see themselves being here a long time, not coming here and you know, hopeful and in the back end of their retirement, and then they're in a good location. So 10 years for me, I would be careful using that cutoff, maybe 7 or something. I just don't want to create that and have a hard line, and then we find ourselves in a position where we might be missing out on candidates because of a number. We can make that decision internally. We could know, obviously we'll see on the resume that they have only had 7 and others might have 10, but at least widening that window to give us a better idea of who it is that we're looking at and what they've done. And I also agree with her point. I think it's hard to create a bright line rule with regards to a city of equal population. To me, the way that she contextualized it with regards to somebody that's in a city with a population of 20,000, we immediately think Podunk, right? They're not similar, but then when you think of another city that might only be 20,000, but it's nearby, for example, I don't know what their population is, but it's lower typically than ours, Naples. Naples would be something to me that stands out as, well, they're obviously a smaller city in population, but to me they've got a significant period of growth. They've got a lot of different issues that they're dealing with that are similar to ours. So again, you've got a difficult job, but I trust that you know what you're doing, and those would just be my 2 points that we kind of deliberate on as we try to set some parameters. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any other lights on. I guess if you could, I think one thing I would like to see, and I know you mentioned it earlier, was basically a timeline of events of how we're going to move through this process. So I guess that would be one of the things that I would ask that you forward to the city so they can forward to each council member so we can see exactly how this process is going to work. And then once maybe we get you know, a little closer, once you've identified your candidates that you have recommended, then maybe that's a point in time where we have a future discussion. Okay, how's this process going to work? The firm has identified X amount of people, their recommendation, and I think that's when we as a council, because we will have some of those unknowns answered with the amount of candidates, and then I think then we could have a discussion at that point, okay, how do we want to move forward from here? So I think that would probably be a good way to move forward, because some of those unknown variables will be identified by then. Ma'am, is that, do you recommend moving forward in that type of fashion?
I do, Mayor.
Okay. And when would you be able to get that that timeline? Not that we're going to hold you to that particular timeline, but at least to give us a reference how you see your firm moving forward.
We can email that to the city today to share with the board.
Okay. Councilmember Steinke?
Thank you. It dawned on me, maybe a good question from a process standpoint. is in your experience, when it is narrowed down to those 5 to 7 candidates that you would recommend that we personally interview, is it customary for those candidates to travel to be personally interviewed, or in our world of Zoom and as we're on today, do they expect to be interviewed, through technology, or is it a personal interview process?
Commissioner, that is certainly an option, video interviews. But I would say in this case, and it's because when you're, one thing we haven't talked about is we're in Florida, and it's difficult for people at this level and city managers and others to compete for other jobs without the world knowing about it. It just doesn't happen. So that said, one thing we need to be mindful of is, while our candidates are professional, and I'm sure they will let their boards know that they are looking at other opportunities or even being considered in other opportunities, truth of the matter is it's probably uncomfortable at some level and awkward at others. So what I would encourage is that we keep our exposure, if you will, of candidates at a minimum. The way we do that is we don't want too much time between when we recommend candidates and when they interview. We need enough time for candidates to clear their schedules and be able to be present. So we're talking 10 days to 2 weeks probably. But likewise, even doing a video interview and then doing an in-person interview, I'm not opposed to that. We can do that. We can video and then narrow it down. I think the in-person dynamics are so much better. I think everybody would agree to that. And if we have 5 candidates, I don't think it's that difficult to do a process of in-person interviews. What I would say is that we need to keep that process probably down to at least 2 days, no longer than that. And not 2 full days, but just I'm saying if we have to bring candidates in, we don't want to stretch it out over a week. We don't want a week-long process. We don't want that. We also want to move through it as cleanly and quickly, again, without jeopardizing the process, as we can, to be respectful of everybody involved. So it will really be up to you whether we do a video or not. If we have 7 candidates that I recommend and you like them all, you may say, let's do video interviews, and then we would need to have interviews probably within a week's time to not stretch that window out of candidates, because we'll end up losing some candidates. The pressure will become too much on their end. Maybe their employers will make a play to keep them. I don't know. It happens. Not often, but it happens. So to answer your question, my preference is in person. My preference is for it to be no longer than a 2-day process. My preference is that those 2 days be at the end of a week, so it doesn't conflict with their council dates where they are, or their commission meetings where they are. And also, my preference is that they do one-on-ones with each of you, and we can talk about this as we get further along. I think it's just great for you to sit down 30 minutes and look a candidate eye to eye. And then, in addition to that, do public interviews where, it's a group interview. They come before the board in a public meeting and interview. And then there's a few other dynamics in there that, we can recommend as we go. But whether it's video or in person, either I'm okay with, preferably in person for just the finalists. And I think that'll serve you well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
If I could, I want to make one more mention about the parameters, the minimum requirements, as Councilmember Long mentioned. I am comfortable with going with a 7-year cutoff for experience. But if that happens, I highly recommend that when it's describing that experience, it's specific to senior level experience, because we need someone who can come into the existing attorney office at a level of already senior experience, supervisory experience. We need them to fit in at a certain level with the existing staff that you have, and be able to manage an office of a dozen or so people.
Thank you. Madam City Attorney, you've heard our discussion here. Do you have any recommendations? I mean, you've filled this position for many, many years. You know exactly what it entails. Any advice you could give council, what we should be looking for?
No, I think that you're moving methodically through the process, so you can better evaluate after you receive her timeline.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for being here today, and we look forward to seeing what your schedule is through the process, and thank you very much for everything that you're doing for us.
Mayor and council members, thank you. I'm super excited about working with you all, and we will have a great process. You will be very happy at the end of this process. And I just want to thank your staff too. That was instrumental in getting me hooked up here via video and for me to be part of the process today. And I was on at the start of the meeting. I did listen. I'll probably listen through the rest of the meeting. This is an opportunity for me to really understand some of the things that you're currently dealing with. And we'll be in tune with what you need, and we'll bring the right candidates to you. But thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on to item 4B2, plan for the city attorney's position. That's continued from our February 1st special meeting. I guess one thing we'll have to discuss is how the process will work moving forward with the new city attorney's choice of a candidate. It sounds like this is about a 14-week process. I think we have to have a discussion on how we are going to implement this moving forward. You know, we have our city attorney now, so it's not like we have an open position. So I think we need to have a discussion collectively how we want to move forward once we get to that 14 weeks from now. And I think that's important to outline and identify so we can see how we're going to end up, and I think that's very important. So with that being said, I'll open up the floor. Councilmember Steinke.
My biggest question, and with absolutely no fear involved, my major question is if we begin with the end in mind, I believe we're looking to November of 24 as your retirement date, as I remember it. So if we're looking, let's say 4 months from now, which is 16 weeks, what do things look like from then until November of 24? We find the city attorney, we make a selection, we bring that person on, they need 30 days notice wherever they are. So now we're looking at 5 months down the road. We're into July, August-ish. And so then how are things structured? Who reports to whom? What happens between August and November of 24?
And that's exactly correct. That's what we're talking about here now at this point. How do we, as a council, how do we want to structure that? How do we want to move forward? As you had mentioned, I think we're definitely going to be somewhere July, August, in that time frame, at a minimum. The candidate might come back and says, hey, I need to give 60-day notice. That could push us closer to September 1st.
Right.
So we just don't know that variable at this point in time. But I think it's still, we need to have the discussion, do we bring that particular individual in as a deputy city attorney for a period of time, or is it all the way till the November of 24 time period? So, you know, that's a choice, a decision that we as a council will have to make.
I think city attorney had a plan in mind, or a suggestion of how that progression would happen. Isn't that true? Haven't you shared kind of your thoughts around how to kind of move positions to work ourselves into that?
I would be happy to provide consultation services with whoever you select to be the new city attorney. And by the way, it wasn't November of '24, it was really September of '24.
Okay, thank you.
So you're just about a year. If you really wanted to put it on a timeline, you probably have accelerated all of this by a year. Because if you were doing this in '24 rather than now, then the timing would be working out perfectly. Your rub is that you decided to do it now, and so that's why you're struggling, I think, a little bit with that, how long does the time take? So, obviously, my plan had been here to stay until September of '24. But if that's not the council's pleasure, then a different date would be, could be potentially worked out.
Okay.
Let me just
I
say
thought there
this,
was some
I do not-
internal
I
kind of
do not-
mentoring and moving positions within your office that you were hoping to have happen between now and then.
Well, with the city attorney position in flux, we are advertising for a new assistant city attorney, but we'll have to take into consideration the speed with which this is moving. I already have one assistant city attorney who's only been here for 3 weeks, and I know that he has now expressed a concern that, oh, you may be leaving and I won't even be off probation, so I'll have a new boss. And I am kind of loath to put somebody else in that position where they come into work and they're going to be working for somebody else. But we are advertising in the meantime.
Okay. Thank you.
I think early on, we had talked about a succession plan and a period of overlap. And I guess first off, the first question to the Madam City Attorney, are you comfortable with a period of overlap? And if so, I think we have to decide what that period of overlap is. I think early on in the discussion, we, recognizing that you were leaving, we wanted to bring an individual in and work with you for a period of time because you've been here for so many years to hopefully share that wealth of knowledge to the new city attorney. So I guess the first question is, are you willing to work in that period of overlap with this particular individual?
Yes, I will say, however, that I would doubt that you would attract a candidate who that you were advertising for a city attorney that would be willing to come here as any kind of a deputy for a period of months. I think they're going to want to come in and be the city attorney. I would be happy to work with them on a consultative basis or anything else like that.
So you're thinking that it's unlikely?
Well, I don't want to speak for the candidates. I'm just saying that when you advertise for a city attorney, most of them would probably want to come in and be the city attorney. Mm-hmm. You may have noticed you used the term "hit the ground running." So I don't mean to speak for any of these as yet unidentified candidates.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but
I would be happy to share whatever knowledge I have with the incoming city attorney.
okay, all right. So I think that's one thing that we don't want to do is go through this process, and in 4 months from now, we tell the individual then if he or she says, "Hey, I'm interested in the city attorney's spot, but I don't want to wait till September of 2024. So I think if we're going to go down this road, we have to have a very defined plan, not only so we know, our city attorney knows, our organization knows, and the candidate knows exactly what our plan is. So I think that's something that we need to try to vet out here today, exactly what that plan is. So not only will the candidates know, we as a council will know, and our organization will know, and our city attorney. So I think that's something that we need to try to vet out. Councilmember Hayden.
Well, the pitfalls in this are, and it limits the talent pool even further, because, the search firm's going to have to be aware, and that never came up during the search. One of the questions we were asking her that during the search, these candidates are going to have to know that it could be a year before they're in that position. It's as I said before, it's an unheard of amount of time. So they've got to be comfortable with that. The second problem could be during this time, whether we name them a deputy city attorney or whatever we name them, they will be doing work for the city. And there may be times when we don't like some of their work that they do for the city. And it puts that person in a position of, during that year, possibly not having the confidence of staff or with us. So we may identify some things that, wow, did we make the right choice here? So, we've put their job kind of in jeopardy, I think, because of the long amount of time. Now, the other option, and the city attorney mentioned it, is do we negotiate a settlement with her now, hire a new city attorney, and she leaves? I think there's a lot of barriers we have to overcome by bringing in somebody now. We can give them another title, but I think we have to look at all the other ramifications that could come up during that year, and something to be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, you have, very similar to the the city manager's contract, it's clearly stated in there, a couple avenues that are provided for us. And I think that you have to look at those avenues and identify them and see if any of those are applicable to the situation that we're in. Me personally, I would like to see some form of overlap. I don't know how we get to that point, but I think it would be in the best interest of our organization as a city to have some form of overlap. Whether that overlap is a year, I don't know. That may be a little too long. It may be hard to get a candidate to agree to that type of a overlap. So that's something, we'll have to discuss.
Mayor, if I may, Lisa Sinagua, HR
Yes.
Director. Something that City Attorney had mentioned on a consultative aspect is, I agree with her points of, one city attorney to direct the city. But if you would be looking at, I don't know if this is the options you've been talking about, adjusting her contract at some point, any given point, of changing that in an overlap situation to the consultative, whether that word is used or not, but a consultative aspect and advisement, and that is a way to continue that contract, get that overlap, and have clear delineation of duties for those positions. That's just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the term of her particular contract that ends on October 9th, 2021. And we may want to notify her that we don't want to exceed that term under the current conditions of this contract. We may want to enter into a different contract in the negotiation with her. So, for argument's sake, just say we bring in August 1st, we bring in a new city attorney. Maybe they work until the October 9th, and we have that overlap period. And then even after that, we may be able to negotiate with our current city attorney that she's available with something that she had mentioned with, a consultation. And we enter into a different agreement after October 9th as a consultant. So that's a possibility too. So I personally, and she even mentioned it, I don't know if we bring a person in July, if they would be, or August, they would be willing to wait a whole year to take that top spot. I would venture to say probably not. You know, so for me, personally, how I see this working out is not to renew the current contract that is spelled out today. Not saying we can't enter into a different contract after October 9th, either for a shorter period of time or a whole different context. And then have the new individual that we have chosen work with our current city attorney from that point until the October 9th deadline. That gives it that overlap period. And then maybe have a discussion at some point in the future, once we've identified who this new individual is, to see if we want to enter into some type of a contract with our existing city attorney for a period of time as almost on call or on retainer. So we could move forward in that fashion as well. Councilmember Shepherd.
Yeah, I think if we hire a new city manager, that person has to be the city manager when they're hired, or I'm sorry, city attorney, excuse me. That our existing city attorney could be some form of consultant. I'd be for that, to finish out our time if there was time left. But I think if we're advertising for a new city attorney and we find one, they need to start in that position when they're hired. But I also agree that consulting is a good idea if there is time left in our city attorney's contract.
All right. Any other suggestions? So I guess, Councilmember Cummings.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you, Mayor. I think finishing out that term with bringing her back as a consultant would make the most sense for this contract, because I do feel like what she had stated, you know, he or she who comes in to fill that position will not want to be the deputy attorney, will want to sit right in that seat and help with the legalities of the city. So I'm in agreement with what you stated. I think that is probably the best way of handling this. So.
Yeah, and let me read the term so everybody is, if you don't have a copy of the contract, so you're familiar. It says the term of this agreement shall be for 3 years commencing on October 9th, 2001. Thereafter, this agreement shall automatically renew each one for 1-year terms unless either party gives notice of a non-renewal at least 6 months prior to the expiration of the current term. My calculations, if we decide not to renew this exact agreement, then we would have to notify her by May of a period of time not to renew the term. Not saying we can't enter into another contract if we so desire, but I think that first we have to ask ourselves, are we only willing to continue the existing term? Or if we want to extend her employment past that time, are we going to enter into another negotiation? Now, there is another clause that I want to bring you attention to as well that says, nothing in this agreement shall prevent, limit, or otherwise interfere with the right of the city to terminate this agreement with or without cause at any time. It goes on to saying, if we go that route, because I think just like our discussion last week in the city manager's contract, there's 2 different sections. One is term in section 1, where you notify that non-renewal, and then there's a section of severance in section 8, with or without cause, that identifies that if you do a severance, that then 9 months of severance pay and a lump sum payment shall be issued. So for me, I would prefer, to keep her working here throughout her term until October 9th of this year. And then if council decides we want to go in a different direction, in a different type of a contractual agreement, then this particular contract would go until then, and we would have to give her that notice that we're not going to move forward, or this agreement would not be automatically renewed.
So I think all we would have to do with that is add an amending contract to that, correct?
Would be a new contract, because what you would basically would be saying is, this particular contract, we would give notice of non-renewal.
Right.
For this contract in its entirety, wouldn't renew past October 9th. Now, that's to say there's nothing that said that we can't enter into another contract. In other words, you may want to do this same exact contract, but do it till January 1st or February 1st. So I think in order to do that, you would have to say a notice of non-renewal for this explicit contract, and then go to the next step if you wanted to have an additional contract.
If we did that, if we all come into agreements, couldn't we, with the new contract, go to a month-to-month basis so we're not locked in? So when that city manager that is hired, she would be coming in under a different contract on a month-to-month basis?
Well, we can do anything as long as the city attorney agrees to it. You know,
Okay.
because this is a two-party contract.
Right.
For me, at this point, I think there's a lot of still unknowns. We don't know if we're going to find a qualified candidate. I think time is on our side here, because we have a city attorney that's been here for 30 years. You know, so time is on our side. I can foresee that this particular contract in its entirety would probably not move forward for another year. So I think what we should do as a council is a notice of non-renewal at this point. Once we know some of these variables in June, July, we may interview a candidate that wants to take over now, you know, so their input's going to be important as well.
Yeah.
Then we can identify how we're going to move forward after October 9th. So if we do the notice of non-renewal, we know that this particular contract in its entirety won't move forward for another year, but that's not saying something else may be agreed upon between council and this city attorney for another period of time.
Makes sense on how you're explaining it, so.
So that's, I think, what we need to decide is, you know, are we going to renew the existing contract in its entirety for another 12 months? If the answer is no, then I think you have to do a notice of non-renewal, and then we can go to step 2. Councilmember Long.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I would agree entirely. I think the inevitable conclusion of the decision that a majority of us had made to post out the position for the new city attorney led to this road here. I think from a timeline perspective, from a procedural standpoint, for the reasons that you just stated, that would be our best option moving forward. That doesn't preclude us the opportunity from continuing forward in that contract after it's over, but it conversely doesn't lock us into another, loosely doing the math, 6-month period or a year period for the contract. So there's probably going to be a few that are going to say, well, we can wait a couple more months to get closer to that window where we meet that 6-month requirement. But we're here. We've already had a lengthy discussion on this matter with both topics today. I think if we're collecting votes here, mine would be to non-renew as well for those reasons. Thank you.
Councilmember Wells.
Yes, I just want to make sure that we're not putting it out there that we're getting rid of our city attorney by doing this non-renewal, that we're just starting a process that we've all agreed upon, that it's going to be a long process between finding someone who's going to be the perfect fit. And, you know, I'm encouraged with what we heard today from the firm. Obviously, they're professionals at doing that, and it's going to take some time. if we have to create another position, I was gonna ask Lisa, midway through, because we find the right person and there is issues, as a council, we can create a position in the city's attorney's office at any time of the year. We don't have to do it during the budget cycle or anything like that if we,
It's not required during the budget cycle. We want to make sure there's budget for that, but yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, but yet through, at a regular council meeting through vote, you can add FTEs. It seems that that would be a shorter or a defined period of time. It's not, doesn't sound like it would be a long-term FTE situation. So that's what you would be budgeting for.
yeah, because we find the right
Short
candidate
year.
with the right fit and everyone's happy. I don't want to tie our hands with anything, so I kind of agree. You know, the notice of non-renewal doesn't mean that we're getting rid of our current city attorney. I just want to make that clear, that this is just, we want to create another contract or know that within this next year, we're working on this progress, so that was it.
Councilmember Hayden?
Mr. City Attorney, in order to not extend or renew your contract, that has to be done by a vote, correct? We can't just take we just can't take consensus up here not to renew. I just don't want anybody to be confused that that decision would have to be made at a voting meeting.
To not renew the contract would take, as you very well know, a vote of the city council.
Right. Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because it seemed like we were going down the line getting consensus here, but I just wanted to make sure that, and now that you know what some of the council members are thinking, are you even agreeable to being a consultant for a few months once a decision is made on whom that next city attorney might be?
I would like to think that an acceptable agreement could be arrived at, which could, by the way, even be an amendment to this contract. I know everyone is saying, oh, this one has to terminate and that one, it could be a smooth transition.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Steinke?
Certainly, our contract employees have contracts that we have to abide by, and the terms that we're considering now is by what time do we have to give a notice of renewal or termination. When it relates to retirement, I would never want to have or set a precedent that would discourage someone from thinking beyond their contract as they would share with us their plans for retirement. And so with the thought that that retirement date had been expressed, if that were to cause us to take action, that retirement intention had not been previously stated, would we be taking the actions that we're taking right now to go into a search for a new city attorney this early on? I'm just challenging our thinking on it just a little bit from the standpoint of if in fact we're, call it a year ahead of time, and we'll find ourselves where the person that we hire would want to take the job immediately, which then would change to some degree the retirement plans of our current city attorney. Are we setting a precedent that a future retiree would say, well, I'm not going to say anything about when I retire because I don't want to speed the process up and have actions taken because I give more notice, if you will, than what my current contract allows. So it's just a sensitivity that I have that with a relationship with a contract employee, that I wouldn't want them to be discouraged from, you know, sharing, if you will, openly what a future plan is beyond their current contract. That's just my 2 cents.
Councilmember Long?
Yeah, just to follow up, I understand and appreciate the points Council Member Stanky had made, but it's my understanding, and I could be wrong, that date was definitive as far as she's in the drop. So we know that that's her final date, whether she expressed it to us or not. That is still applicable moving forward, but in the context of this specific decision, for me personally, that didn't have any sway one way or the other. I just want to make that clear, if that is indeed correct, that's made a part of the record. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're familiar with the drop. You know, once you get to that day, you have to leave. It's not a choice like, oh, I'm going to stay another year. That's once you get to that 5 years. I think it's a 5-year maximum. Any time within that 5 years, once you've engaged into that program, you can leave. But once you get to that 5 years, you have to leave. So I guess you know, we have to decide on this particular contract. Do we want to do a notice of non-renewal? Is that the desire of council? And then have a discussion at a later time if we want to enter into a different type of contract once we know some of the variables down the road? Is that the course of action that we want to take? I don't think, you know, since we're going down this path and we've started the ball down the hill, I think we have no choice but to do that. And then once some unknown variables are identified, you know, in the perfect world, we'd find a candidate and he would say, hey, I'm fine for coming in as the number 2 until next year. We don't know that at this point in time. So to make sure that until we know that for sure, and we can enter into a different agreement for a period of time, even if the city attorney stays until next September, we can identify and enter into a different agreement at that point in time. Madam City Attorney.
For whatever it's worth, I don't think you need to give notice of non-renewal right now, because I see no reason why people cannot keep their options open. The existing contract can be amended without it terminating at all. It could be amended, which might even flow more smoothly, because you would have, the contract itself would provide the history. In other words, it could say something like, in light of the fact that the city council is hiring a new city attorney, the existing employee will transition into the role of, I don't know, consultant, whatever, until X date. Yes, it will take revision, but I mean, contracts can be amended.
Mm-hmm.
That's my only comment.
Thank you, and I respect that. Unfortunately, with the way that the contract is laid out, there, if we do a notice of non-renewal, we have about May 8th, May 9th, that's our drop dead date if we decide to go that course of action. I don't think that we're going to know by May 8th or 9th, one being who the next city attorney is. 2, we probably wouldn't have picked that individual by then. And so then some of these unknown variables, we still won't know by then. So for me, I think the only course is to do the notice of non-renewal. And then once we identify those unknown variables, then we see our next path and we have another discussion. And that could be a different contract after October 9th. I think that's our only, for me, that's the best for all parties involved. Councilmember Stanky.
What is our drop dead date to give notice?
It says this contract was entered October 9th, 2001, so that's the date. And therefore, this agreement shall be automatically renewed for a period of 1-year terms unless either party gives notice of non-renewal at least 6 months prior to the expiration date of the current term.
So that would be April 9th.
May, June, July, August, September, October. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So is that the desire of council between now and May 8th or 9th that we put that on a agenda?
Yeah.
For a regular council meeting to issue a notice of non-renewal and have a vote accordingly? Is that the desire, Councilmember Welch?
Yeah, I think between now and then, we'll give each of us plenty of time to speak with the current city attorney about the contract and potential renewals and maybe amendments to the current contract as well, if that's the better, like she is stating, that might be the better way to go. Between now and April, the end of the month, we have a whole month of March to speak with her individually, and I wouldn't be opposed to, waiting closer to that date to make that decision, so we have ample time to have the discussions with her, not here on the dais, but personally in our, in our own time.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that, and actually I said May, and I stand corrected because it's actually April. So that even makes the problem even worse because we only have between today's date and April 9th, and I guarantee between that time period, those unknowns that we've all been speaking about, we're not going to have those unknowns answered. So even to your comment that you just made, sure, we may be able to have that discussion with the city attorney to see what her desire is, but we still don't know the desire of the new candidate that's going to be coming on board that's identified. And for me, that's an important element of the conversation as well. And we won't have that answer till later in time. So that's why I feel that the only thing that we can do is do the notice of non-renewal. Not saying that we can't come back to the drawing board and have those discussions with our city attorney, come up with a subsequent plan, if any, after October 9th. So I want to make it clear, my desire isn't to get rid of her between now and October 9th. That's not my intent at all. My intent is, under the current terms of the conditions, I know after October 9th of this year, I think those conditions and terms will have to change. And we don't know those variables now. So it's kind of hard to even have that discussion with our city attorney until we identify what all those variables are. That's my point. Councilmember Long.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, I don't think that we have any, no matter how many months we want to put in between now when we make this decision and have our powwows and this and that, the end result is the same, regardless of whether we have these discussions about her exit period and this and that. No matter what we do or how those discussions go, at the end of the day, this decision needs to be made. So for me, making that sooner than later not only clarifies that position for us, because we can still have those discussions, like the mayor just said, but it also doesn't create any sort of period of uncertainty that's counterintuitive to our search for a new city attorney. If these individuals come and they look and they say that we're having trouble fumbling as to whether or not we want to basically create a window where that individual can come right in and get to work right away. So the longer that we wait and delay that decision, to me, I feel like it may be counterintuitive to the search for a new city attorney, because those individuals, I would hope if they got that far, were smart enough to take a look and do some diligence into us, and if they look at this point in time and realize that we're fumbling with the decision as to whether or not that position is even going to be available for them at the end of their hiring window, that to me doesn't instill very much confidence in the fact that we already made the decision to do the hunt. And no matter what we do or how we do it, either way we're going to have to non-renew the contract. So it would be my recommendation to do it at the earliest voting meeting that we can, just so that we have that decision made. We've protected ourselves with regards to the 6-month notification, and then of course we can still enter into those discussions with the city attorney regarding the hunt, the process, and how her exit plan may look like when that picture becomes more clear.
Councilmember Steinke.
Thank you. I guess I don't see pluses or minuses between giving the notice of non-renewal between now and April 9th. And right or wrong, I would tend to agree with Councilmember Welch that I'd like an opportunity to talk with the city attorney prior to voting. And I don't see why that would take very long to do. And if we have to set another, if we have to set the date to have the vote anyway, unless you were proposing that we take the vote right here, which I don't believe we can, I think we just, for those of us that it's important to, we just get in our schedules to have the time to sit down and talk with the city attorney before we vote. So I would like that opportunity, and I'll take it upon myself to do that as quickly as I possibly can, to not delay other people's desire to vote as quickly as possible.
Well, why don't we do this? And I think it would give everybody that sense of comfort and the opportunity to speak with our city attorney. And it also falls within the confines of the terms of the notice of non-renewal. Why don't we set this for a topic on our first regular meeting in March? Today is February 8th. That gives us all the next 3 weeks, 2.5, 3 weeks to have whatever discussions that you may or may not want to have. And it still falls within the confines of the contract. And we'll set that as an agenda item and direct the city clerk to do that in our first regular meeting in March. Does that work for everyone?
Works for me.
Okay. Madam City Clerk, if you could add that to our first meeting in March.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Any other discussions on that? Seeing none, I'll move on to item 5, roundtable discussions. There's none listed. Does any council member have any roundtable discussions? Seeing none, time and place of a future meeting. We have a regular meeting of the Cape Coral City Council scheduled for Wednesday, February 15th, 2023, beginning at 4:30 p.m. here in council chambers. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.